Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're tackling a really big idea, a political problem that's as old as time itself, how the very tools we build to create order can get twisted and turned against us. And this is the central question, right? It's what this whole thing boils down to. It forces you to look past why a new power is created and ask, okay, but what does this look like in 5 years? What happens when my political opponents get their hands on this? You know, one of our sources really frames this perfectly. It's that classic be careful what you wish for scenario, but playing out on a massive political stage. The argument is that any power you create for your side today sets a precedent, and it could be used against you tomorrow. Okay, so let's really dive into this. The core idea here is that any system, any law, any piece of tech that one political party puts in place doesn't just vanish when they're out of office. Nope. It gets inherited, and the new folks in charge might have a very, very different idea of how to use it. And this slide is where it gets really concrete. These are real-world examples from the source material. Look at the Patriot Act. It was created to track foreign terrorists after 9/11, but then its scope expands to monitoring domestic groups. Or take immigration data, as one source points out. One administration uses an executive order to protect people from deportation, but the next administration could theoretically use that very same data to find and separate families. You see the pattern? The tool stays the same, but the purpose can get completely flipped on its head. So, you gotta ask, right? If these tools can be flipped so easily, how do they even get passed in the first place? Well, one of our sources uses this really clever metaphor to explain it. It's called the candy-coated pill. And it's such a great image, isn't it? The idea is you take a really controversial policy, that's the pill, and you wrap it in something that everyone agrees with, like protecting children, that's the candy. It makes the whole thing much easier to swallow, so you don't look too closely at the long-term side effects. And this slide gives us a perfect example of how that might work. The source points to the UK's online safety laws. The candy is the stated goal, protecting kids. I mean, who could argue with that? But the alleged pill hidden inside is this huge new power to censor political dissent, to block protest videos from being seen, and ultimately to collect a ton of data on your own citizens. All right, so we've seen the theory and a real-world example. But what happens when you take these fears and you crank them up to 11? We're going to explore that now by looking at a thought experiment, a full-blown dystopian narrative that comes from some of the more fringe source material we looked at. It's the ultimate weaponized system. And just so we're all crystal clear here, what we're about to go through comes from a very specific, unverified source. We're presenting it neutrally, not because we're saying it's true, but to illustrate the ultimate fear of how these systems of control could, in a worst-case scenario, be used. So, according to this narrative, there's a secret two-part plan. The first part is called Project Pogo. This is the bait. It's all about using online content that's actually true but goes against the official story to see who follows it, to attract and identify anyone who's questioning the status quo. The second part, that's Project Zyphr, and this is the trap. This is the alleged plan for what to do once you have your list of names. Okay, let's break down that first part, Project Pogo. How, according to the source, would they actually go about identifying people in the first place? Well, the process is allegedly called TTID. It's an acronym for Tag, Track, and ID. And its whole job, its only purpose, is to build a giant database of every single person who consumes, likes, and comments on this specific kind of content. And here's a direct quote from the source that just lays it all out. The claim is that through platform data, they can track your IP address, connect your YouTube account to your real email, and slowly build a complete profile that says, we know exactly who you are, where you are, and what you think. The content, that's just the lure to get you on the hook. So let's say the list is made, the targets are identified, what happens next? This is where the thought experiment moves into its second phase, Project Zyphr, and it gets really dark. According to this story, the goal wasn't small. The documents that are cited in the source allegedly identified a target list of 15 million American dissidents, all slated for elimination. And the alleged methods are chillingly specific. For high-value targets, they'd be physically rounded up during planned power outages. For lower-value targets, it would be much quieter. Targeted viruses designed to look like a bad flu season. And the cover story for this entire operation? A complete financial collapse, creating so much chaos that a new world government would seem like the only solution. To make this vision even more epic in scale, another source connects this kind of planning to claims of huge amounts of, missing government money.
The figure they cite is an absolutely mind-boggling $21 trillion.
And what was that money supposedly for? The claim is that it was used to build a secret escape plan for the architects themselves, 170 deep underground military bases, so the elite could just ride out the very apocalypse they are accused of creating.
Okay, let's pull back from that extreme scenario for a minute. Because as wild as that thought experiment is, the reason it resonates with some people is because it's like a distorted mirror. It reflects very real anxieties that many of us already have about surveillance and power.
And this is where it all comes back together. The fears that Project Pogo and Zyphr represent are just exaggerated versions of things we're already debating today. We have real concerns about government surveillance under the Patriot Act, right? Well, the thought experiment just extends that to watching YouTube videos. We have real databases for tracking potential threats. It just imagines lists for tracking political dissidents. We've all seen emergency powers used for lockdowns. It just imagines blackouts used for abductions. It's the same fear, just magnified 1,000 times. Which brings us right back to our central dilemma. That fringe narrative is an extreme, yeah? But it forces us to ask a very real and very urgent question. When we build these powerful systems, how do we make sure they can't be turned against us? How do we create order today without paving the way for tyranny tomorrow? That, right there, is the double-edged sword of power.